The Cycle of Violence, Bloodshed, and Abuse in Literature by Samantha Sparridge. Throughout humanity's existence, violence has become an integral part of history and people's understanding and conception of the world. However, scholars and leaders, such as Martin Luther, have questioned whether violence is truly a necessary evil for individuals to contend with. According to Martin Luther, a monk who led the Protestant Reformation, nothing good ever comes of violence. By studying, examining, and analyzing works of literature in the same way in which Luther studied the Bible in his quest for knowledge, people can discover that violence is not a harbinger of good things. As evidenced by the cycles of violence, bloodshed, and abuse in Macbeth, Oedipus Rex, and in the Dream House, it is rare that anything good ever comes of violence, as violence begets more violence and psychological suffering, and anything good or beneficial that may result from it comes at the cost of human life and the mental well-being of those affected. To prove that nothing good comes of violence, William Shakespeare's play Macbeth must be dissected. Macbeth, which surveys the downfall of Macbeth's character as he succumbs to his ambition and darkest desires for power and control over his fate, serves as a text which can be examined under the guise of observing the results of violence and how the cycle of violence is first formed and perpetuated. This cycle of ceaseless violence began when he and Lady Macbeth make preparations to assassinate Duncan, the current King of Scotland. Once Macbeth has fulfilled his ambitious desire to become king, he then plans to murder Banquo and his son, Fleance, to cement his position on the Scottish throne. After Banquo is killed, Macbeth begins to unravel upon seeing the ghost of Banquo sitting in his chair during his first banquet as king. As Macbeth confides his fears and anxieties of the murderous acts he has committed to Lady Macbeth, he says that it will have blood, they say. Blood will have blood. Macbeth's concerning statement indicates that violence will only bring about more violence, and the initial act will prolong the cycle of bloodshed and death. Macbeth understands that by murdering Duncan and Banquo, he has initiated this cycle, and blood will continue to be spilled. He later confirms the cycle of violence will continue when he promises, "My strange and self-abuse is the initiate fear that wants hard use. We are yet but young indeed." He confirms in this promise that these delusions of ghosts are the manifestation of his guilt, and will conclude once he and Lady Macbeth continue to kill and are no longer beginners in crime. Macbeth implies that they will maintain their acts of violence in order to secure their fate. His violent rampage continues with the assassination of Macduff's family, and the cycle finally reaches its conclusion when Macbeth is killed by Macduff in the battle to remove Macbeth from power. Although Malcolm becomes the King of Scotland in the end, this victory comes at the sacrifice of Duncan, Banquo, Macduff's family, and all of the soldiers who died in battle. The cycle of violence is not limited to Macbeth, but reappears throughout literature in pieces such as Oedipus Rex. An additional text discussing the rapid progression of death and violence is Oedipus Rex, the play by the Greek writer Sophocles. Upon learning their son is fated to murder his father and marry his mother, the parents of Oedipus begin the cycle of abuse and violence by choosing to abandon their son on the mountain of Pithairon. However, Oedipus survives and eventually murders his father, marries his mother, and has multiple children with her, thus fulfilling his fate. When Jocasta, his mother and wife, learns the identity of Oedipus, she takes her own life, which perpetuates the violence of the story. The brutality continues when Oedipus blinds himself after discovering that he has conformed to his fate. In his desperation to cope with his predicament, Oedipus meets with Creon for guidance. He begs Crayon to assist him in returning to the same mountain he was first abandoned on to die alone, separated from the rest of humanity, so he can remove his wickedness and wretchedness from Thebes. Before leaving the city, Oedipus requests to visit with his daughters one final time. When Antigone and Ismene enter the scene, Oedipus says, "Come here, come to my hands, a brother's hands which turned your father's eyes, those bright eyes you knew once, to what you see, a father seeing nothing, knowing nothing, begetting you from his own source of life." Oedipus's cry for his children insinuates that the cycle of violence destroyed his character and the man and father he once was. Nothing good resulted from the abusive actions of his parents and the violent choices he made, because he became a man full of shame and wickedness from his crime of patricide and was left with nothing. However, Oedipus is still hopeful in the single piece of advice he bestows to his daughters. "But as it is, let this be what you pray. Give me a life wherever there is opportunity to live, a better life than was my father's." Oedipus Rex argues that the only path of action to take to end the cycle of violence is to build a better legacy for one's future descendants. This is the final effort of Oedipus to leave his daughters with some hope that the cycle of violence can be broken, despite all the pain and suffering that it caused their family. A modern piece of literature that continues the discussion of the cyclic nature of violence and abuse and the effects on those involved is In the Dream House, which is the memoir of Carmen Maria Machado, who has been a finalist for the National Book Award and the Nebula Award for Best Novelette. In the Dream House chronicles Machado's experience in an abusive relationship during her early 20s and how she has been able to cope with her trauma through recontextualizing her circumstances as works of Gothic fiction, magical realism, as well as by analyzing her life through a historical and interconnected lens with other stories of abuse and violence. After Machado explores how the cycle of abuse and violence begins through ignorance and a lack of empathy, she details how violence from loved ones induces violent imaginings, suicidal ideations, as well as thoughts of pain and death. As Machado reflects on herself and her frame of mind during the time she was in the abusive relationship, she writes, "In the pit of it, you fantasize about dying, tripping on a sidewalk and stumbling into the path of an oncoming car. A gas leak silently offing you in your sleep, a machete-wielding madman on public transit, falling down the stairs, but drunk, so you flop limb over limb like a marionette and feel no pain. Anything to make it stop. You have forgotten that leaving is an option." These violent and disturbing images created in Machado's mind express how violence and abuse damage a victim's psyche and bring significant harm to their mental health. Violence creates more violence in this cycle, and, even in the human mind, there is no escape from it. In the Dream House additionally examines how abuse leads to violence through self-defense on the part of the victim. Even though this violence is done to protect oneself from further lethal abuse, the court of law rarely protects this violence and often punishes the victim or survivor, especially if the abused is not a white, straight woman. After Annette Green shot and killed her abusive female partner, Green was one of the first queer people to use battered woman syndrome to justify her crime. The baffled judge eventually allowed Green's defense, but it was not successful. Green was convicted of second-degree murder. A paralegal who worked with Green's attorney told a reporter that if this had been a heterosexual relationship, she would have been acquitted. The previous example detailed in Machado's memoir conveys that violence in relationships often leads to violence done in self-defense, but is ultimately treated with an absence of understanding for the complexity of the cycle of violence by the courts in the United States. To abolish the cycle of violence, In the Dream House also makes the argument that nonviolent approaches are the best way to help survivors recover from abusive situations and relationships. Machado shows through her personal narrative a moment when her close friends reach out to her and assist her through one of the most emotionally difficult nights of her life, during her abusive relationship. After Machado's friends have discovered her in the middle of her dining room preparing for a party with a large bloody gash on her leg, she writes that John leads you to the couch and asks Laura to get some band-aids. Laura rolls up your leggings and cleans the cuts with hydrogen peroxide. John sits next to you, resting his wide hand between your shoulder blades, anchoring your shuddering skeleton. John calls one friend, who calls another, and soon all the people you've spent a year and a half not confiding in have shown up on your doorstep. They find you lying across the couch and get to work like the mice in Cinderella, sweeping, cleaning, making shopping lists. Through their non-violent approach and reaction to Machado's episodes, her friends are able to help her find peace and comfort in that moment in her life during such a mentally challenging period. Without unconditional emotional support and non-violent means of healing, the cycle of violence and abuse will only continue to hurt the victims and survivors of the cycle. As proven by the narratives of violence, bloodshed, and abuse in Macbeth, Oedipus Rex, and in the Dream House, nothing good ever comes of violence because it causes significant pain and suffering to all involved in the cycle of violence. Through analyzing a variety of unique texts throughout different time periods and cultures, it can be seen that violence is the precursor to more violence, as well as abuse, bloodshed, and often death. However, it is imperative for humanity to remember the methods, such as nonviolence and focusing on one's legacy and future, to end the cycle of violence, thus protecting others from destruction. And here's my works cited page of the 3 works I used to complete this assignment. Thank you.